these are assignment submission forms. So the way that every assignment is going to work is that not only will you be turning in like the final product, you'll be turning in a still image, a Maya file, whatever, but you'll also be turning in this submission form. And the way that I grade my stuff is I look at the submission form that you've turned in, I find your files, I check it off. You have this, you have this, you have this. If there's any notes, you mess something up, I'll write it on the sheet. I'll put that into Canvas and I'll give you the sheet back. And that way you'll know how many points you have on the sheet. If you decide that you are satisfied with that grade, you got full points or you got 2 points, whatever it is, and you're satisfied with it, you can just recycle that piece of paper or save it, I guess, if you want to do that. If you resubmit it, you fix all the stuff you want fixing, you hit the resubmit, and then you turn it in. You get 1 resubmit per assignment, so it's not going to be like you resubmit it, and then I fix stuff, and then you resubmit it again, and I fix more stuff. You get 1 resubmit. So make sure that you have all the boxes checked for what you want the first go, and then it'll be a lot easier. So this assignment number 1, which is the one we're working on, is simple prop. I don't know why I put props. Simple prop. There we go. And the due date is going to be the 31st. This is not a long project, obviously, because it's our first one. We're using a lot of the same tools that we've used in Cinema and just applying them in Maya. We will be using different stuff, obviously, because it is Maya. Get the project description is to get acclimated to the modeling, lighting, and rendering workflow in Maya and after Maya. Just an FYI also, I will have this printed. I think it did print, I just haven't grabbed it yet. And I have a purple binder up here that I'm going to have all these housed in. So after I'm done, if you didn't grab something from this sheet, you can always go up to the purple binder, flip to the 2520, and just copy it off of that. So we'll be modeling 1 item using extrude, bevel, and the split tools. The item we did last time was our practice item. So today when we come in, we're going to wipe it, make a new project, and then start from scratch, okay? You can still use that for something else, so don't think that, oh, I spent 3 hours and I can't use this. You definitely can use it for other stuff. But I want you to start again just to get refreshed on all those tools, okay? Today I'm going to go over the materials. We want to make sure that our materials help define the object. If everything is the same color or just like boring colors or the material settings aren't right, it really like detracts from the surface. We'll add lighting to the scene, very similar to how we would do it inside of Cinema. We'll render using what are called passes. I talked about these in previous classes. If you've followed 3D, I'm sure you've seen those things before. And then we'll be compositing in either Nuke or Photoshop. I'll show both ways so you can see it. And this is going to be an introductory to that process. It is not going to be how deep we will go. We will get deeper with that process, okay? And with everything, compositing or taking our still image and bringing it into Photoshop to tweak or into Nuke to tweak is every project I've ever seen anyone do that looks cool. There's some amount of tweaking that you have to do to it. Nothing is going to typically look super awesome right out of the box, okay? For your turn-ins for this, you'll be turning in your research. So I mentioned before finding images of different things that you found. That includes your concept development. So you might have like 20 different images that you've decided that you like different features or whatever else. And then the artwork, whatever else you've drawn for this specific assignment, okay? Your turn-ins for this will be everything. So I want to make sure that your file structure, your folders are staying organized. I want to make sure your scenes are in the scenes folder, your images in the images folder. Again, we'll go over that. And then your still image will be like the main thing. That's what we're after in this assignment, okay? After this class, you go to put your portfolio together. You want to put something up on a website. That still image is what we're going to have to put up there. This could obviously be turned into an animation too. So if you wanted to animate a turntable or something, you could definitely do that as a secondary thing for your portfolio. The resolution will be 1920 by 1080. This is a minimum. keep in mind that if you ever wanted to print something, you ever wanted to make a super high-res image in your portfolio or whatever, you'd want to render at a bigger size. So if you're really liking the way your stuff is turning out, I would probably double those numbers so you can have a higher resolution image, okay? And that way you don't have to go back to it. This is our class, MACA 2520, 3D modeling and rendering. And we have 6 points possible. Make sure when you fill out your sheet, you put your name in the spot that says your name, and make sure it's readable. And then on Wednesday, when you turn these in, you'll just make sure that you give me the sheet along with all your other stuff. Questions on the sheet? Sir?
Why does it say August 31st when that's Saturday?
Because I'm wrong. 28th, sorry.
I wasn't sure because it did not look right at all.
No, it doesn't. Oh, no, sorry. That's right. Back to my mindset. It's the 31st I let this be due. That way, if you didn't get it done on the 28th, you want to come in a lab on the 29th or 30th or 31st, you can do that.
Okay, that threw me off.
Yeah.
So,
No. I forgot why I did it, and then I remembered.
okay, that threw me off.
Yep. So just by Saturday, it has to be turned in. Obviously, to the server, which is where we're going to be turning our stuff in. All right. Any other questions?
Turn it in after Wednesday. Will we give you the assignment turn-in sheet by
On Monday, yep. Anything else? No. All right. Okay. All right, so this is what we're kind of after here is just a nice still image of what we worked on, okay? So there's one still image, there's another still image. And there's nothing fancy about anything I've done in either of these. It's using, again, just those 3 tools over and over and over again, all right? This is an okay version of this same one. This is the same rendering. The only thing I've done different is I post-processed and modified what it looks like, okay? And realistically, if I were to turn this off, that would be more of a straight out of Maya render, okay? You always want to look at what can I do to enhance this to make it more pleasant to look at, to make it a better image. So here is an item that I modeled. This is, again, using those same concepts, extruding, beveling, and inserting edge loops, just to go over some of the basics of how I got from A to B. I grabbed all the points here. This is how I started it, and I chamfered. And you'll see that what chamfer does is it just gives me those corners like this. And then all of these pieces here, we're looking for. Oh, I don't have one here. Across the hall in the rendering lab, or right there. So I'm going to grab these faces and I'm going to extrude them. If I just extrude like this, they're all attached, which could be a cool shape, but I may not want them attached, so I'm going to say keep faces together off, and now they're not attached. And so I lowered this down, oops, to something like this, and then I extruded it again, and then I pushed it in, and then I extruded again, and then I offset again, then I extruded again, and then I pushed it in again, okay? Now I did that a lot more to get the shape that I had, okay? If you look at how many different pieces are here, you can basically see all the different times I extruded and pushed in, extruded and pushed in, extruded and offset and whatever else. Now, eventually I got to the point where I was satisfied with those extrusions, and I went through and I just grabbed all the edges. Now this part did take a while to do because I had to go through all of this and grab every hard corner edge all the way around this thing. Over there, thank you. And then this, and then all the way around, and so on. Okay, even these pieces here. Some of these will allow you to double click. Some of these, like this one, I have to click individually. And that's just because this face here doesn't have any divisions on it, so it doesn't know how to go around, okay? Same thing there. So then I would do a bevel on this. I would hit, 0.2, maybe 3 segments. And then when I smooth this, I get this really cool, like, sharp transition in there with these corners, okay? Even these little pegs sticking out of the edge, those are just extrusions. Instead of pushing in, I just pulled it out. These pieces here, this started off as a, where's it at? Disc. And then by changing the disc subdivision to a cap, adding more sides, 32, I think I did 5 or 6 there. And then I went and did the horrible part of going through and deleting stuff out that I didn't want. And I did basically this. Delete that. And then I went through and did the same thing here. Now, you would think there would be an easier way to do this. There's not. It's just this. And then you get the idea, right? Yes. All right. Maybe I'll do something like that. That might look cool. All right. So then I just took that shape and extruded it and pulled it up. Now watch when I extrude this down the other way, how it turns black. Last time I said don't worry about that because we're just kind of screwing around. This surface is inside out, okay? That will cause issues later on. So if you see any surfaces that are black, we definitely want them to be gray, so just extrude the other way, okay? Usually you'll get it with a flat surface, not necessarily like on here as I'm extruding. Am I going to get that? Unless I really do something weird. All right, so then I took this, I grabbed every edge, like this and like this, like, oops. Come on. And I added a bevel to this. I'm actually going to leave that as a little bit, I'm going to leave it as a 1 here. That might be kind of cool. And then I'm going to bevel this and this and this and that. And I'm going to bevel that as a smaller number. So now I get this kind of like flattened out ring. Another little tip is that this backside, if I don't care what the backside looks like, I'm not going to see it. I can just delete those pieces. I can just go like this and delete. And then when I hit 3, I don't have to worry about this kind of smoothing out weird like it was doing. And then the same thing here. I'm going to do this a different way. I'm going to grab all these faces. I'm going to hit Shift greater than. That's not greater than. That's a new hotkey that I just learned apparently. There you go. Shift greater than. I'm going to hit Isolate selected. There we go. And that just isolates those pieces. So now I can grab all of these edges, add bevels to it, and then unisolate, and now I have this kind of cool little piece that I could then throw into this. Maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay. So this is a separate piece. All of these are just the same pieces all over the place. And then if I needed to at any point, let me go back to this other one. If I wanted to keep this as a crisper edge, I may insert an edge loop, let's say right there and right there. This one, it looks weird, but definitely I could. On this one, I extruded these faces out right here, right there. And before I extruded them, or after I extruded them, I had this. Oops, that was the wrong one. Let me delete this one. That one and this one. There we go. And it was rounding this off, so I didn't like how it was rounding that off. So I went to my edge loop, and I just added an edge loop here and there. And then that made that a bit crisper all the way around there. Same thing this way. I can add an edge loop here, add an edge loop there, and keep that nice and crisp. Okay. On this glass piece here, make a new layer, go to green, there we go. This piece right here, that's what happens when you jump between settings, there we go. This piece right there was done the same way that I did that cap part. I just created a shape, deleted some of the pieces out, and then extruded it to give it thickness. Same thing here, just deleted it to create thickness. This here was just extrusions inward. That blue thing in the middle was just some random extrusions on a cylinder to create that kind of look. These here, you can see that same shape, that same corner piece that I did for my other one. And then extruding them outward to create that. I created these little loops by doing essentially the same thing. Okay. All right, so as far as modeling goes, that's where it is. So I'm going to make a new project. Actually, I think we made a project for a simple prop. We did. Okay, so we already made a simple project prop. I'm going to set my project to my simple prop project. There we go. And then I'm going to set up the materials. So let me just reset all my stuff that I have here. Nothing here, nothing here. Grab this, assign that, delete, delete, delete. And that should be it. Okay. So now I'm back to square one. All right, so this is right after I would get done with the model. You may notice too that some of my sides don't look the same. This side I just kind of destroyed, as I was deleting stuff. But that doesn't matter because I really only care about one side. This side here might be sufficient. If you realize you've modeled something screwed up along the way, there is a mirroring tool, and it works pretty easy as long as you haven't moved your shape. So if I just go to mirror, it's going to mirror by default on the x-axis in the negative direction. So basically, if I switch to this direction, here's the x-axis, and you can see how I can scale this if I needed to, or move it, and it'll actually offset that way. Or I can change this to the y, or I can change this to the z, and I'll get different results. You can also change which one is there, the positive side or the negative. So I'm going to leave it just like that for now. That'd be good enough for the demo. So I need to create some lighting in here. So I'm going to first create a ground because we have to have something to rest our stuff on. So that'll be a plane. I'll make it huge, 500 in X, Y, and Z. I'll make sure that my item is actually sitting on the ground, so that might mean moving the ground up or moving my item down. It looks like it's already sitting on it, so I should be good. I'm going to go to Arnold, I'm going to go to lights, and you'll see just like cinema, we have area lights, sky dome lights, there's mesh lights, which are object lights, and then some other stuff. I'm going to go to the area light, and I'm going to scale it up, and I'm going to rotate it. Now I have to decide which direction I want to shoot this from, because that's where my light is going to be. So if I'm going to be, let's say, here, like this, then I want my light to be on this side. And I want it to be kind of rotated like this and rotated like that. And I'm going to pull it back just a bit. And maybe rotate it just a little bit more. Okay? And the reason for that is I want my shadow to be, I want to see it, but I don't want it to be in the way. I want the brightest side to be, by my camera. So I'm going to render. Oops. I jumped ahead. I didn't want to click the button yet. Close. Under this Arnold menu, this is where the render button is. If you click this, it'll open up the render view, and then you can see what it looks like when it renders. Now, Arnold is a physically based rendering system, which means that it's actually using the distance from the light to the surface in realistic terms. Okay? So right now we don't see anything because the light intensity is just not powerful enough. So I need to close this window. I need to click on the light. That's why I have my outliner open. And then I'm going to hit Control A. Control A, if you watch the hotkey video, is Attribute Editor. This is basically all the stuff here and a bunch more. And it's a lot more visible or visual to edit your stuff. So I'm going to be very aggressive with my intensity. I set it to 500. That's probably not going to be enough. We'll see. So I'm going to go back to my render button, and there it is. So that's not actually not too bad. So now I can see my item. I can see the shadow here. So that looks pretty good. Just to show you, if I close this and I spun around to this side where there's no light and I rendered it, I would get something that looks like this, which looks kind of stupid. So I don't want that. I'm going to go back to where my view was. All right. I can also give my light a little bit of color. As you look at different things, as you look at different renderings, 3D prop rendering, and I can use my Pinterest page too, something like this. Typically your lights are not going to be like a bright white light. Usually it's going to be some form of a yellow tint or a blue tint or a green tint or an orange tint or something, okay? Just because very rarely would you find an actually pure white light. So if I go here, I can give it a little bit of a color tint. And by little, that's as much as I mean. If you go too crazy, it's going to look like you're like lighting it with orange, versus this as having a orangish tint. So I'll render this again. Okay. Now, if you remember from Cinema, and this is one of the cool things about how Cinema has its stuff set up, it had a little area on the side where you could save all your renderings and then cycle between them. Okay. There is a spot in here, but typically what I'll do is I'll just go to View, and I will say Store Snapshot. Okay. This will save it down at the bottom here. You have to tell it which ones you want to save. So now if I were to go back to here, and I were to say, I haven't closed the window obviously, and I were to say I'm going to add a little bit more orange to this, and I'm going to really go crazy, notice how it automatically updated. So Cinema has this too. I'd never really used it because it was slow. You might find this too slow also. But this is Interactive Photorealistic Rendering, IPR. So here is my rendered one. If I use my down arrow, if I click on the snapshot and then use my up and down arrow, I can cycle between the two images. Here's what's currently rendered. Here's what it looked like before. So that I can see which one I like best. Make sure I go back to the original one. And then I will click on my light again. And then I will take this color and not make it so much. There we go. And if I decide to go with the blue, you can obviously see what that little bluish tint does to it. I like that. Okay. I'm happy with that for now, so I'm just going to close that and close this. All right, so now I need some materials on here. So I'm going to go to face mode. I have one item, okay, one major item, and I have these small parts. I don't want to blast everything with the same material because it's very difficult to see what it looks like. If you look at most of these shapes for these kinds of things, you'll see that there is like some dark grays, light grays, and maybe a splash of color. Okay, even this one, dark grays, light grays, and then you'll see a splash of red on here. Here's this one, dark grays, light grays, splashes of blue, some orange, and then some white right there. Okay, so I'm going to do something very similar to this, and I'm going to try to come up with some kind of rationale for why things are colored different. So hotkeys for selecting stuff. Regular selecting, you can just marquee. Okay, if I want to add to my selection, if I want to toggle my selection, I hold Shift, and I can drag over it. So that's the same thing that it works in every other software pretty much. Regular dragging, holding Shift, regular dragging again, it just will, whatever you have selected, it'll do the opposite. Okay, so sometimes I'll actually use this as kind of like a random way to select things if I'm doing something crazy. Control and Shift will add to the selection. So if I marquee this, it's already selected, it's not going to do anything. If I marquee more of this, it'll add to that selection. if I hold Control and drag, it will deselect stuff. Okay, so as I'm doing this, as I'm doing all my selections, I'm going to switch between Shift, and Control to do all my selecting. So I'm marking this, and I would of course go around and do all of them. So this one, I think this might be a cool piece to also have that same color. So I'm going to hold down Shift and click this edge first, or face first, then Shift double click, and it'll go all the way around. So Shift click this, Shift double click. Maybe this piece here. That might be cool to have that same color. And maybe I'll even do it to that one. Okay. And again, I would do this all the way around this entire thing. For the lecture, I'm not doing that. I'm going to hold down the space bar. This is where every menu in Maya is. This is the hot box. You may have already seen it. You may have accidentally hit the space bar. Under lighting and shading, I'm going to go to assign new material. And then let go of the space bar. And now I can get to where I can actually assign materials. Okay. In Cinema, we would double click, it would create a material, and we would use that. Or we would go to the menu and choose one. This is Arnold that we're rendering with, so we're going to go to the Arnold area. In here, we only need to focus right now with one, which is the AI standard surface. I'm going to give this a name. I'm going to call this light gray. And I'm going to color it light gray. You'll see options that are very similar to Cinema's. Cinema had a tab for each one of these areas, where Maya has one area, everything is right there. So here's my base, here's my reflection, here's my transparency, here's subsurface, coat, sheen, and so on, all the way down the line. So if I go to base, there's my color. If I go to specular, I can control the roughness or the coloring of that highlight. Now, I need to grab everything else to color that the dark gray. So if I hold Shift and marquee it, it's going to deselect the light gray stuff and reselect the areas I want dark gray. So then I'll hold the space bar, go to lighting and shading, assign a new material. Go to shader for Arnold, go to standard surface, and call this dark gray. And then just pick my dark gray color. Right click, back to object mode. There's my stuff. Render. And there's my default setup. Okay. Now, we are getting a lot of highlight on here. And this looks a little bit too gray and boring. So I'm going to hit this stop button so it goes a little bit quicker. And I have to get back to those materials. So this is one of the nice things about Maya, is that you can click right on the item. And in the attribute editor, it'll show you all the history. So here's all those split rings I did to it. Here's all the edge deleting I did. And then way on the far right is dark gray and light gray. So if I go to light gray, I can make this less rough. If I go to dark gray, maybe I can make this also a little bit more rough. And maybe pull down that color a little bit more. Back to Arnold, back to render. Maybe I don't want that light gray to be so light gray. Hit the play button. There we go. I think I need a lot more light gray on this. Just don't have enough contrast. So I'm just grabbing some random spots in here. Not really random, but just spots I think should have this color. Maybe something in here. Lighting and shading. I'm not going to do new because I don't need a new one. I'm going to use an existing one, and I'm going to use light gray. I'm also going to go back to object mode, these pieces, go to assign existing, and go to light gray also. There you go. So it's looking better. I could obviously adjust it, tweak it, maybe modify some more details to it. All right, that's good. I think I'm going to add another light to my scene, so I can duplicate this one and scoot it over and rotate it. It's missing it. Let's angle that better. There we go. So now we can see the shadow from this one. We can see the shadow from that one. So that's going to be sufficient for this.
They give off the same amount of light for each because it's the same type of light?
Yep, same type of light and same intensity. Okay. Now, the size of the light will control the sharpness of those shadows. So the thinner this shadow is actually going to be a lot tighter than if it were, let's say, that big. Okay. So sometimes you may want a huge light just to blast some light into the scene to add some areas to your shadows. And sometimes you want that tight light just to have a sharp, crisp shadow. Okay. So in this one, I'm just going to leave it like it was there. And again, your rendering process is it's a process. You're always going to be tweaking it and modifying it all the way up to the end. All right, so we're going to call that sufficient for now. Now, I may want to change this background color, or the grounds color, okay? If we look at my Photoshop image, and I go to this bottom layer and I pick a different color and I fill it with that, you'll see that my entire background changes. The ground also changes its color as well. So that's something that I want to include so that I have the ability to do that inside of Photoshop, okay? So in here, I'm going to assign a new material to the ground, and this part's the same process. I'm going to go to my Arnold shaders and I'm going to choose the shadow matte. And what this is going to do is it's going to render out shadows, but it's not going to render out the ground itself. Okay, so the ground will actually be transparent. So I'm going to say render. We won't see the ground there. I want to see the shadows, so I'm going to click on this. This is my transparency. Boom. Now we can see there's the shadows. That's what the shadows are going to look like. I click that again, and the shadows go away. I may want to have some indirect specular in here. Specular, if you remember, is reflections. So now I can get this reflection on the bottom of this. If you, again, remember from some of the stuff we looked at. Some of the pieces, like this one, you can see this is... Once it loads. That's the one. There you go. So you can see here how we have that reflection on the ground, just like this, right? So same thing, we have that reflection on the ground. We can control the intensity of the reflection. We can control the roughness of it. And then the IOR is going to control the brightness of it. So the higher up that IOR, the closer to that original color. The further down, typically the dimmer it's going to be. Sometimes you have to stop the rendering and then close the window and then restart it. Or maybe I went too far down. I did. And it's going very slow right now. There we go. So this is at 0.5. You can see it's definitely a lot dimmer than it was a second ago. Okay. So I'm going to put this intensity, like let's say 0.7. Put the roughness to, oops, come on, 0.125. Nope, 1.5. Come on. There we go. I want it to be visible as a reflection, but I don't want it to be like, you know, a mirror image of it. All right, so now let's look at that. Cool. It's weird that I'm not getting anything down there. Shadow mask lights. Alpha mask. Alright. Should be good for now. Alright, so I've got my lights set up. I've got my materials on here. I've tweaked them a little bit. We'll get more in depth into the materials as we go along. Now I want to set up my camera. So we can render right from this perspective view. I'm going to click on this resolution gate. So in Cinema, it was kind of always there, just these like dim bars on the side. In Maya, we can turn it on and see exactly this is what's going to render. We're rendering in 1920 by 1080. This is the same proportions, so that doesn't matter. So as long as it says 960 by 540, the framing will still be there. All right, so I may not want to center this. You know, this is kind of boring having it right in the center. So I'm kind of going off to the side. And I probably want to show a little bit of the top because I have that piece up there. If I need to adjust my settings for the camera, I can click on it here. This is perspective. And then I can change things like focal length. Typically, that's the only one we really need to change. That's way too much. 90. There we go. All right, so let's say I'm going to leave this right here. Now if I go to render, there it is off to the side. Okay, so everything right now is set up as far as lights, materials, and the object. So now I'm going to do my render settings setup. In Cinema, we click the render settings. Maya has a very similar button, which is right here with the little gear, render settings. Everything in this window should be fine except for the size is 1920 by 1080. In the Arnold renderer, this is the quality setting. So in Cinema, there's a lot of stuff. Typically, we only dealt with like one or two things. There's a lot more control over this one that we will adjust. This is the system area, which is controlling how it's rendering some of the stuff. And then I want to go to this AOV tab. So when I render this out, I don't want just a solid image, because if it's just a solid image, I get no ability to play around with the look of it afterwards. So I want to render out something additional to this. This is a list of all the different render passes that we can do. For whatever reason, it's not a default one in here, but I'm going to do it add custom and make my own. So I'm going to put AO, I'm going to hit create, and then this is going to make an ambient occlusion. This is a black and white image which will allow us to add some depth to our item. I'm going to go to this arrow and I'm going to say select AOV node, hit Control A, or click here first, then hit Control A. And then under this shader, under custom AOV, I'm going to click on the map button. Anytime we see this, that means that we can connect something to it. Cinema had these, they just always hit them. So now I'm going to type in ambient occlusion, and under Arnold, it'll show up here. So now I'm going to go back and render. Okay, this doesn't look any different, but watch what happens when I come over here where it says beauty and change this to AO. This gives me a black and white image of the ambient occlusion. Okay, so what we're after here is we want dark areas and light areas. I don't want the in-between gray areas. Okay, so I'm going to close this. And I would typically keep it open while I'm working, but because I'm recording and doing that, it just goes slow. I'm going to take this far clipping down to, let's say, 10. Render again. And now we have a lot more contrast. I'll take the clipping down even more to, let's say, 5. Not 105, just 5. And it's thinking. Oops, let me hit play. There we go. Maybe it needs to be at 1. Nope. There we go. So this is a good amount. Where we have this white area will stay the original color. Where we have this black area will get really dark. And then where we have these like grayish areas here, it'll add a little bit more shading to it. Okay. So now there's two more things I need to adjust before I actually render this and save it. One is when I do my ambient occlusion, I don't want to have this. There's nothing back here. It'll actually like blacken out that area. It'll look weird. So I have to get rid of that. And then the other thing is my render quality. You can see how stair-step this is. That's going to look pretty horrible when it renders out. Okay. On my beauty, I don't really notice it because I don't see it there, but trust me, it's there. And when I go to my alpha channel, I don't know if you can see it. My reflection is there. It's like barely there, but it's like right there. This is like way too grainy. So part of this will kind of go together where I up my render settings to do a higher quality render that should smooth out my shadows and fix that stair stepping. And then for the background under the ambient occlusion, for this, I just need to add a shape back there so that it has something to have ambient occlusion with. So I'm just going to cheat, and I'm going to go to Edges. I'm going to grab the edge all the way around this and just extrude that up. So I just did a regular extrude on the edge, pushed it up, and now I have a surface way in the back. That might cause me issues. Let me see. Yes, it does. See, it does. I shouldn't have done that. Let me just make something different. Create. That's here. So I'm going to make a huge sphere, enormous sphere. And then let's try that again, render this out again, and see. There we go. So now we don't have that line right in the middle, which would have caused some weirdness to happen. Everything else should be good. The beauty path should still look good, yes. The alpha channel, oops, should still look good, but now we have that there. And I want primary visibility off. Let's just see first. All right, so there we go. So we don't have that. And then do we have the ambient occlusion? Nope, now that's gone. That shouldn't be there. Why is it there still? That. Put the sphere right here. Make sure that's still on. Okay. All right. So now that still has it. So I'm just going to turn it off for that object. So somewhere in these millions of settings, under my render settings, under my ambient occlusion, select AO. Click on the arrow here. Self only, exclusion. I don't want that though. All right. There's a way I can't think of it at the moment of what I need to do. So I'm just going to do this. We're going to angle it down, and we don't have to worry about that. And I don't want that to be self only, so I'm going to go back to that option. And this is one of the scary things about Maya initially, is just there's so many menus, so many different areas to go into and modify and tweak to get things to look right. Come on, there we go. All right, there we go. So now everything should be good with that. All right, so now I'm going to go into my render settings, and under Arnold Render, I'm going to take this Camera AA. This is the anti-aliasing. This is what's going to smooth out my shadows. This is what's going to get rid of that stair stepping that we saw before. It's at 3. If I go to 4, that might be good enough. If I go to 5, it might be good enough. Every time I go up, it's going to take longer and longer to render. So right now this is at 180 samples. If I go to 4, it goes to 320. So it's going to take that much longer to render our stuff. So if I go to render, let me switch to my alpha. And wait. On the very bottom of this, it says rendering. That's the way I know it's still rendering. I can see the little timer right here, or the little percentage. So that tells me again that it's rendering. I think I may have to go up one more to the next number. Now sometimes what I'll do is I'll keep the resolution low, just like we would in cinema. 960 by 540, render it low, make sure all my settings are good. Then right before I'm ready for the final one, I'll crank up the settings to 1920. It doesn't show it moving around, but it's still there. Yep. And that's where in the render settings under system, this is where you're choosing how big that is, and you're choosing the kind of bucket sampling that you're doing. Oops, come on. So at 50%, yeah, we're at 50%, that's still not nice and smooth. You can use this. This is crop region, so if you just want to focus on one area, it's like render region. You can click on that, render out that one spot, and typically it's going to render this spot faster than the entire image. So if I preview this and say, okay, these samples are not good enough, I need to have a lot more detail here, then I know to go into my camera settings, make that 5, let's say, and let that smooth out. All right, so that should be good enough for what we're doing with this. Okay. So I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to turn this back to that. Yes. And turn this back to that. All right, so now I'm ready to go. So I'm going to go to Arnold Render and kick this off. Now this process is going to do the actual end rendering. So this is where it's going to do the high-res calculating of my lights, of my shadows, of my reflections, of all my stuff. And then it's going to output it. I'm going to stop it, so I'm going to hit escape, because I already have this saved. When I'm done, I'll use Save Multilayer EXR. I'll put this into my images folder, and I'll call it Sarcona Prop Me for Photoshop. Okay. And now the Photoshop process is actually relatively simple. I'm not going to go over Nuke today. I'll just go over the Photoshop part. Let me close all of these. So the first thing that I did was I installed this plugin. And the plugin is just a way to really help you out. It's free. Photoshop. It's EXR.io free Photoshop EXR plugin. So you download the plugin, run it, it'll install it into Photoshop's directory, and then when you open up a EXR file, which is what I just saved that as, when I went to Save Multilayer EXR, when I go to open and I find one of these images like the cubes, and then I hit open, it'll pop open this window. Okay? A multilayer EXR means that it's saving multiple things inside that same folder or inside that same file. So inside this EXR file is my beauty pass and it's my ambient occlusion pass. And when we get further in the class, we'll have other passes in there too. So then I can hit open, and now it gives me this. Now, if I look at the layers, you'll see that I have this RGBA and then I have ambient occlusion, which is what the AO means. If I turn this off, there's the AO. That's that black and white pass. This is my color. So I'm going to swap the order. I'm going to take my AO and do a multiply. I'm going to hold Alt and click between these two layers. Do I want to do that? Maybe. Let's see. Yes, I do. There we go. And now I have the boxes, I have the shadow, and I have the ambient occlusion. I'm going to zoom in here just so you can see. If I toggle the ambient occlusion on and off, you can see how much more depth it just adds to that. And if I click on this and hit Control L, I can play with that and tighten up the depth. That might be too much. Okay, so you can see how much darker the darks are and how much brighter the brights are. Then I'm going to make another new layer, drop it underneath, give this a color. Go above this, make another new layer. And I'm actually going to save this as a 8-bit. Don't merge. And I'm going to go to black, take my opacity down, make sure my brush is set to soft. And I'm just going to darken in some part of this here. I want to bring the viewer's focus right to the bins. Go back here. So by darkening these other areas, I'm able to do that. Now you'll see it looks kind of like crappy how like grainy it is. You can actually see the strokes. So I'm just going to go to blur, go to Gaussian blur, and soften that out. That looks pretty good. Okay. All right, so that darkened that. I'm going to make another new layer. I'm going to pick white. And I'm just going to hit a couple of these items here. Let me control click this. Let me click on this layer and then do a layer mask. And then I can play with things like maybe set this to overlay. There we go. So you can see how it kind of bumped up that brightness a little bit. That's pretty good. Maybe I want to add another layer here. Let me sample this color and then really brighten it up. Let me drop it maybe behind that. No, that doesn't look good. Let me control click this again. Let me go to select invert and do another layer mask. There we go. So now I have this like brighter spot that's like right behind the block. That might look kind of cool. And then maybe I'll add an adjustment layer on top of curves. And then that's kind of cool. Maybe I'll do a hue and saturation. There we go. And I think last thing I just need on here is just to take this and just blur that again. It still looks kind of fuzzy. There we go. So that's how we're able to take just this kind of boring render here and enhance it by adding that ambient occlusion, adding some other layers to it. So this is where your Photoshop really comes in because you can do that kind of stuff. And if you've forgotten all your Photoshop stuff, then relearn it over the weekend. You got time. Cool. So I'm going to save this. Sarcona cubes. Simple prop. Final. And I'll save this as a PSD. Okay. You'll see the staging here. I have this prop and I have these little props there. You can obviously do some staging stuff. Glass canister. Here's all the layers again. I just kind of went through this one to get it to not look boring. I even added a little bit of glow around the edges of this one just because I thought that might look kind of neat. And I think it does look kind of neat. If you downloaded, I don't think I have any on here right now, but if you downloaded some bling brushes, we'll just pretend that's one. That's not one. Any starburst or the highlights or any of those, well, whatever. You could add that too, and you'll get this like little like blingy area of this. Okay. So that'll take you to the end of the project. So obviously you start off modeling your item, assigning your materials to it, do your lighting, do your rendering, do your pass, bring in Photoshop, set it up. Use those other images as reference. You know, stuff like this where again, you got the light gray, the dark gray, you got these little pockets of color. You can see how much detail he's adding to this stuff just by having these. Even when it's desaturated, it just looks amazing when you have the right setup and enough detail. Sweet. Cool. Questions on that yet? Mm-hmm.
Why did you change it to 8?
If I left it at 32, so this one is 32, I'm going to make a new layer here and go to my regular brush. As I was painting this with black before, okay, well, it's not doing it now, but it was chunky basically. Like there was an obvious line. Oh, that's what I did. I changed this to multiply. It's not doing it this time, of course, but it did it before. Yep, it's not doing it. Whatever. This is 32. Yeah. Let me reopen the cubes again and see if it'll do it for me. Because I'm trying to explain it. That's it. Let's just reset this. That's there. It's fine. All right. I was definitely not that chunky before. Nope. I don't know why it's doing it now. Now it's fine. Yeah. So before it was like literally like super dark. It was no. There's no hardness here. No. This is down. Yeah, it was just really dark, like really contrasted. So I went back to 8-bit, it was fine. All right, so you can leave it at 32 if it doesn't cause an issue. It's weird. Yeah, then went to white. Yeah. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Yeah, see, that looks a lot better now, just that, whatever. This is just one of the fun things about any of the software. Sometimes the stuff works correctly and sometimes it doesn't. We just find workarounds. Cool. Let me just switch this over and just see. So this was on multiply. There. That's a background. Nope. All right. Everything's working correctly now. Yeah, that was the reason I went to 32 because the black looked like really, like it was cut out, like it was totally not supposed to be there, like that. That's what it looked like. See how white? There's a line around the white. That's what it was doing. All right. So you don't have to do that. Any other questions? All right.